Buonasera, good evening, everybody. Thank you for being with us this evening to this nth, I can't remember which one, conversation of today's Incroci di Civiltà. It's a very good way to finish the day, the best possible. With this conversation, we're going to hear today between Carlo Ginzburg and Lena Herzog on vanishing languages, vanishing worlds. A conversation that will start from Lena Herzog's work, Last Whispers, Immersive Oratorio for Vanishing Voices, Collapsing Universes, and a Falling Tree. She will explain this to you. I'm very happy to have both Lena and Carlo Ginzburg here. We have, most of us, probably all of us, seen the work of art that Lena Herzog has installed in the CFZ, and for those who haven't seen it yet, the very few ones, please take a chance to go there. It's a great experience. This conversation will be directed by Professor Silvia Burini, who is also the curator or co-curator of the exhibition. The conversation is also it's taking place also through the collaboration, and thanks to the collaboration with the Department of Philosophy and Cultural Heritage. I would like to thank the director of the department, Professor Barbieri. So, without further ado, I would like to call the next step, and I leave the floor to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Buonasera a tutti, sono Silvia Burini e vi introdurrò brevemente questa conversazione in italiano perché non vogliamo perdere questa nostra lingua stasera. Il mio ruolo marginale, ho l'onore di introdurre solo la conversazione tra Lena Herzog e Carlo Ginzburg, questa conversazione che ha il suo kairos e il suo contesto, che è l'installazione di Lena, Last Whispers, Immersive Auditorium for Vanishing Voices, Collapsing Universes and the Falling Tree, di cui abbiamo già sentito e avete visto il teaser, che abbiamo inaugurato il 20 aprile. Lena Herzog è una fotografa e un'artista americana multidisciplinare e concettuale, vive a Los Angeles. Il suo lavoro è riconosciuto a livello internazionale, affronta temi della ritualità e del gesto, ma anche della perdita e della dislocazione. È un approccio che nasce dall'intersezione tra arte e scienza e nei suoi lavori a stampa utilizza tecniche fotografiche tradizionali, sia contemporanee ma anche sperimentali, e poi i progetti multimediali invece impiegano tecnologie all'avanguardia nel suono, nell'installazione immersiva e nella realtà virtuale. Si tratta di un progetto composito, abbiamo un'installazione site-specific di immagini tratte dal progetto, stills del progetto, accompagnate da un memoriale. Qua le parole saranno importanti. Memoriale è quello che avete visto entrando nel cortile di Ca' Foscari, delle lingue a rischio o addirittura già estinte, che sarà aperta al pubblico fino al 30 settembre. Sopra le liste di queste lingue ci sono degli stills del video di Lena, che invece è un oratorio, quindi abbiamo un memoriale e un oratorio immersivo in realtà virtuale dedicato alla scomparsa di queste lingue. Il video si può vedere alle Zattere fino al 30 luglio con gli Oculus. Ma abbiamo un altro punto importante del progetto che non è ancora, ma sarà presto visibile, il 18 giugno per Art Night, l'evento di punta del programma di Ca' Foscari sarà proprio il video di Lena Herzog, invece all'aperto, quindi per la prima volta, in prima mondiale, lo vedremo su uno schermo grande nel cortile di Ca' Foscari. Perché è importante? Perché sto dicendovi queste cose, a parte per creare, dicevo, il kairos, il contesto di questa conversazione, perché questo progetto è in un'università e non è un caso che abbiamo scelto di fare questa conversazione in una delle aule più belle della nostra università, l'Aula Baratto, perché è un progetto che si basa su una ricerca documentale amplissima. Lena ha selezionato materiali provenienti dall'Endangered Languages Documentation Program del SOAS di Londra, lo Smithsonian Institution ed anche da una dozzina di altri archivi al mondo. L'esito, avete visto un pezzettino, è un lavoro corale che è moderno e tradizionale al tempo stesso, perché unisce, forse l'avete percepito, registrazioni di discorsi, canzoni, recitativi, incantesimi rituali, suoni della natura, ma anche frequenze provenienti dallo spazio, rese percepibili all'orecchio umano, come le onde gravitazionali prodotte dalle supernove, che sappiamo sono le stelle morenti. Quindi questo panorama sonoro immersivo, Last Whispers, è un'invocazione struggente, un incantesimo anche per quelle a rischio, e il pubblico si trova proiettato in un paesaggio cosmico e terrestre, mentre voci lontane lo richiamano dal vuoto spaziale. Il risultato è una immersione viscerale, sensoriale. Carlo Ginzburg non ha naturalmente bisogno di nessuna presentazione. Tutti sanno che dagli anni 60 del secolo scorso ha contribuito a rinnovare dalle basi la pratica storiografica, dapprima mescolando ambiti e livelli di indagine, prima rigorosamente distinti in high e low, dopo i benandanti nel 66 o il formaggio e i vermi del 76, si è compreso finalmente il valore di un'indagine polistratificata sul passato. Il professor Ginzburg ha poi mescolato le discipline, in particolare arte e storia dell'arte, indagini su Piero, 81, miti, emblemi e spie, 86, paura, reverenza, terrore, 5 saggi di iconografia politica, 2015, ma anche altri saperi, e anche la cronaca e la storia, come con il giudice e lo storico, considerazioni in margine al processo Sofri del 91. Ma stasera vorrei ricordare tuttavia un altro libro, Occhiacci di legno, 9 riflessioni sulla distanza, 98, e assumerne un piccolo spunto. Il capitolo 3 si intitola Rappresentazione, la parola, l'idea, la cosa. In generale parla di simulacri, dei 2 corpi del re di Kantorowicz, dei funerali dei sovrani tra Medioevo e prima età moderna. Qui ci occupiamo dei funerali delle lingue e l'inizio di quel capitolo riguarda da vicino Last Whispers. Riporto solo il primo capoverso, cito: Nelle scienze umane si parla molto e da molto tempo di rappresentazione, un successo dovuto senza dubbio all'ambiguità del termine. Da un lato la rappresentazione sta per la realtà rappresentata e quindi suggerisce la presenza. Ma la contrapposizione si potrebbe facilmente rovesciare. Nel primo caso la rappresentazione è presente, sia pure come surrogato. Nel secondo, essa finisce col richiamare per contrasto la realtà assente che intende rappresentare. Non indulgerò in questo noioso gioco di specchi. Fine della citazione. In Lena Herzog ci sono specchi non noiosi, oculus per guardarci dentro, dinamiche sostitutive di linguaggi estinti o quasi estinti, pressappoco nel senso conferito da Gombrich nel saggio Meditation on a Hobby Horse. Entrambi hanno riflettuto con medi e punti di vista diversi sulle intersecazioni tra macro e microcosmo, tra lingue ufficiali e lingue segrete. Parlano di presenze e di assenze. Lena sostiene che la lingua è il nostro primo atto creativo, la lingua ci permette di modellizzare l'esperienza, il mondo è un testo e abbiamo bisogno delle lingue differenti per poterlo comprendere. Finisco qui citando Yuri Lotman, perché non posso non citarlo. In quanto la coscienza dell'uomo è coscienza linguistica, tutti gli aspetti dei modelli sovracostruiti sulla coscienza, fra cui l'arte, possono essere definiti come sistemi di modellizzazione secondaria. Così l'arte può essere descritta come una lingua secondaria e l'opera d'arte come un testo di questa lingua. Se la cultura è un sistema, se esso si struttura seguendo per analogia la concezione strutturale della lingua, il sistema primario, i segni che possono modellizzare i fatti della vita culturale possono essere considerati più specificatamente dei codici culturali secondari e vengono definiti sistemi di modellizzazione secondaria. Qualsiasi atto creativo è un atto linguistico. Grazie. The floor is yours.
It's a honor, it's a joy to be here. Thank you very much for this invitation. I experienced your extraordinary work this morning, and I'm still overwhelmed by it. And I'm trying to make sense of my reactions to it. I must say something about my own work in order to explain why my reactions was also related to the unexpected feeling of a shared field of commitments between your work and mine. I was not prepared to this. 60 years ago, not far from here, in the State Archive of Venice, I came across a document, an inquisitorial document. I was working on Inquisition documents across Italy. I came across a document involving a young cowherd, Menichino dalla Tisana, 1583, if I remember well. And the inquisitor asked, why are you known as a benandante? A word I had never heard before. And Menichino said, after some hesitations, he said, because with other benandanti, we fight in spirit against witches in the valley of Josaphat for the fertility of the crops. We benandanti have as weapons fennel branches, the witches have sorghum sticks. I was astonished, and I was unable to continue my work that morning. But then my project started. I came across other trials against benandanti, and now, today, I would regard the Benandanti believes as a kind of last whisper, a vanishing language, which the inquisitors tried to subvert and change and deconstruct as something comparable, actually identical with the stereotype of witchcraft. So Benandanti as anti-witches, enemies of witches, were supposed to become witches. Okay, so let's say, when I tried to make sense of my reactions to your work, I thought, well, after all, for so many years, I worked on documents related to oral culture. Well, something is comparable to the dying languages which you have evoked in such a compelling, extraordinary way. So I wouldn't say a sense of familiarity, but let's say a sense of contiguity. But then there was something completely different, even opposite. Let me explain why I'm saying this. As a historian, when I work on documents, I have always the feeling that there is myself here, and there are the documents. There is a distance, an intellectual distance, a cultural distance which I have to overcome, but the distance is there. That's me, and then those actors, dead actors. Now, when I was immersed in your work, I disappeared. There was no I. The kind of unexpected feeling when I was immersed in the forest. There was no I, there was the forest. I never had such an experience. I must say, retrospectively, I'm even worried. And maybe you are not surprised by this, because that metaphor of the immersion, the full immersion into the experience you have constructed and reconstructed is something which implies the disappearance of, how should I call this, the person involved in the experience. The object,
A visitor.
A visitor, okay. So we have a new challenging metaphor. Up to you, a visitor.
Where do I start? The intention was to make the visitor feel part of the chorus, to disappear and dissolve in this cultural chorus that is so various and beautiful that you don't hopefully mind disappearing. In virtual reality, there are choices when you begin to build the work. And I built the work in VR, not because I was interested in VR. I was never a gamer. I was never into VR. But I needed to create something that would evoke presence, to address absence. And in order to address an extinction, the form of which is silence, how do you address it? You sound that what went silent. An obvious answer, but how? And the answer is in such a way that their existence cannot, will not be denied. They existed. But I also wanted something to happen to you, my visitor. And so I constructed a way of building, which I called an empathetic vector.
Okay, go ahead.
I created the term to define what we are doing. So, to give you a very clear example, it's at its most clear in the finale at the end, which is something that you saw in the trailer. And the finale, towards the end, the last 7 minutes, what you see is you're in outer space, you are disembodied. We make a choice when we built the piece to disembody you. There are choices where you can see your body. We decided you will be disembodied. And you see the world of others chattering, singing, speaking, go away from you, north of you, coming towards you, closer to you, gong, around you, you. So the others were away, far away. They came closer. They surrounded you. They whispered into your ear. And the very end, you exhale with them, which is the end of the piece. These vectors were built in sound to correspond to the image. So the empathetic vector went from you not knowing them to getting to know them, to being surrounded by them, to becoming them, a part of them, at least for a moment. And that's why when we built the work, we decided that the visitor will be disembodied. And another reason that you feel suspended is because when we create the physics in this work, when you build the piece like that, you actually start from scratch. You have the powers of God for that particular piece, and you create the physics. So what is your weight, and can you fly? And I decided, yes, you can fly. But what kind of flight would it be? It would be an owl, a night bird. So when you're flying through the forest, you're slightly above the height of the person, and you fly through at the speed of the owl or some night bird that sails rather than goes up and down, up and down. So, however, to start at the beginning, what you hear and what you see is an expanding universe. So you hear a bell. It's a low decibel bell, alarm. And also what you see is an expansion of the universe. The universe is rushing away from you. And I wanted that. I wanted it because I wanted you to make room in your being for these worlds. And to make room in your being for these worlds, I wanted you to feel like you were expanding. Like this, there's an enormous room. You can house these universes. Because, of course, every language is a universe, a world.
Okay, let me explain why when you said for the first time the word empathetic, you said it twice. But the first time I started to laugh a little bit. Why? Well, empathy is a very widespread word. It became a kind of, it's really very popular. Now, I said in several circumstances that I dislike this word, this notion, and actually I oppose philology to empathy. I'm talking as a historian. Philology meaning, well, first of all, the definition of philology given by Nietzsche a former philologist who became a philosopher. And he said that the definition of philology is slow reading. Beautiful. And actually, in the last decades, I would even say, I argued that slow reading is in fact compatible with the speed, the incredible speed of the internet. And we have to combine them. Now, empathy is just the opposite of philology. I mean, there is no distance. To me, empathy is a kind of misleading word because identification is impossible. So the distance cannot be abolished, and the distance must be, let's say, a tool in order to have a real knowledge of other people, other cultures, and so on and so forth. Now, I'm not opposing, let's say, two ideologies. I'm trying to make sense of the feeling I had this morning in being immersed in your work, something which was completely unexpected. So, I mean, I'm not denying the extraordinary relevance of your work, but I'm trying to stress a distance because the idea of being dissolved in this experience seems to me, well, I would even say dangerous. I mean, certainly, the political point, I say political in a deep sense, about the disappearance of languages is very important. And I believe that you are able to convey this message through your work. But this is only the beginning, of course, because otherwise there will be only, let's say, emotional fragments and empathy as a kind of misleading identification with what? With disappearing languages? I mean, I'm not denying the enormous impact of your work. Not at all. Actually, I mean, I felt a constraint, as I told you probably. A constraint. In other words, I was unable to think or to let's say, create a distance between the forest and myself. I was lost in the forest, but there was no I again. I must say, well, I mean, I can imagine a kind of addiction. So actually, I would like to immerse myself again and again in your work, but it's an addiction, and we have to...
You have to fight it.
Yeah, and also to, let's say, emphasize the role of philology in the sense of Giambattista Vico as an instrument, philology in a broad sense, in order to understand the world we live in, which is full of unknown experiences, unknown cultures, unknown phenomena, and we have to look at them and to create a distance, especially when we have the feeling of being familiar with them, so the power of estrangement.
But it's not mutually exclusive.
No, okay.
Because,
yeah.
as a matter of fact, the distances, if we talk about distances that we see in the build itself, they go from light years and enormous distances to closeness. Because they're not mutually exclusive. I'd like to have it all, you know, one of our very good friends, Lawrence Krauss, is a cosmologist. And I asked him once, well, what do cosmologists think? Does the universe tend towards chaos or towards harmony? And he says, well, there's a school of thought that it tends toward chaos, and the other school of thought that it tends towards harmony. And I said, well, I have a theory, it tends towards both at the same time. And so in here, in this work, for example, when you see the singing dot in green, we think it's a lullaby because we don't quite know. We know some of the words of the song, but we, as people who understood things via linguists who translated some of what they could translate. And the singing dot begins to sing very close to you. So we located the sound of her singing as if to your ear, as if a mother would sing. And then we changed it to sing a cathedral, as if in a cathedral. So we actually stretched the distance from very close and singing into your ear to cathedral. And this is, again, this kind of a sense that I want the being of a visitor to keep expanding and constraining, expanding and constraining. And this is not mutually exclusive, they're complementary.
Okay, I agree. Actually, I was stressing the fact that, let's say, slow reading and the speed of internet are not mutually exclusive. On the contrary, they must interact. So in the same perspective, we could say that, let's say, virtual reality and knowledge of reality are not mutually exclusive, but they are not, let's say, compatible in the sense of being converging at the same time. So I can imagine somebody, let's say, being immersed in your work and then going back and trying to make sense of vanishing languages in a non-virtual perspective. Virtual reality cannot be a substitute for reality. That seems to me obvious.
Sure.
Okay, so the problem is to understand the interaction between the two perspectives.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, now I was thinking about. But then there was a kind of this can be a digression. I think that after having been immersed in your work, I asked a question.
Yes.
Meaning, why at a certain moment the geographical map is seen in a kind of mirror.
Yes.
Yeah, and so it's, let's say, the usual image is subverted. I think I was looking at, let's say, South America. So I tried to make sense of this, and I said, well, maybe this is a kind of estrangement. So, I mean, the idea that you are looking at the Earth from
inside.
Or no?
Well, first you see it properly.
Yeah.
And then after the gong, there's a gong, and then the world is all around you, and you see it from inside.
From inside.
So it's like traveling through the looking glass. I mean, I really would love for the visitor to fly, to be suspended, and to travel, and to feel expanded, and to feel constrained.
Okay.
And this experience, this kind of fluidity of experience, I think allows us to find home in our soul for the worlds.
Yeah, but I mean, I liked your metaphor about the visitor, because by definition, the visitor is there, but only temporarily.
Yes.
So, I mean, after the immersion in the virtual reality, it will come back in a more sober, uncontrolled reality. So, a visitor, okay. I think that, let's say, there is no ambiguity in this.
Right.
And I completely agree with this. So the problem would be to to construct a way of conveying this virtual reality in a perspective in which the visitor will come back to the everyday world, but with this sense of richness,
Yes.
having learned something
Yes.
from the virtual reality experience.
Well, having experienced the world and having a sense, a feeling of having heard people that would never otherwise hear, even if you do not know what they're saying or singing about, I want to shift in our perception, because we live in this world where we're drowning in our own voices. In fact, we're floating on an ocean filled with the silence of others. An overwhelming majority of languages that are spoken now will be gone in something like 30 years, 50 years.
Yeah. Now, I mean, historians are familiar with, let's say, not only lost languages, but with the fact that the traces they work with are just the tip of an iceberg. I mean, the amount of unavailable experiences is overwhelming. So we, as historians, we try to make sense on the basis of the surviving documents. I mean, what we can find and what we can analyze and so on, trying to make sense of those documents as, let's say, fragments related to a lost reality. Because after all, oral cultures and oral interactions are lost forever. So in that sense, certainly, I mean, the disappearance of languages you are, let's say, dealing with in your work is a new phenomenon in terms of speed, that's for sure. Also because, I mean, we don't have this kind of evidence for a large part of the past. But after all, this is the result of globalization. And
That's one of the things.
yeah, and then inevitably it will be inevitable to make a comparison between, let's say, the disappearing of languages and the disappearing of plants, animal species, and so on and so forth. There is
But actually, languages disappear at a higher speed than most of the species. So we're talking about a language every 2 weeks.
No, okay.
Dying.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that there is a sort of context which
Right.
can explain even those different speeds.
Right.
In other words, there is a fragility of the environment, both natural and cultural,
Yes.
which embraces all those phenomena, although, let's say, the respective speed is very different.
Yeah.
So I think that this, let's say, is the context in which we can approach those phenomena, and we can approach your work, of course.
I also think that there is I suspect that we share a kind of proclivity to hear voices that are not necessarily authorized. And that's why Minocchio, the Miller, was so compelling, and Benandanti, and the witches.
Yeah.
And actually, the reason that they are propelled through ages to us in the documents was because they were heretics. So they had to be documented by the people who had the authority to control the narrative. And what we have with the vanishing languages that I am showing is actually something that they're not heretics. They are just the last ones that we could reach with the mics and recording devices.
Yeah. But as you can see...
But the intention, the sort of proclivity, the interest in, not the monarchs, perhaps, and not the generals, but the common men and women.
Yeah, as you can see, I mean, there is a sort of shared concern, but then there is an interesting divergence. In other words, I think that as a historian, I'm trying to work on case studies which, as cases, pave the way to hypothetical generalizations which can be tested and so on and so forth. This is absolutely different from what you are doing.
Yeah.
And I think that the two perspectives should be looked at also, as we were saying before, as, let's say, elements of a possible interaction. So we can imagine the visitor visiting your virtual reality and then going back to a sober kind of philological approach to the world. It's possible.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think perhaps with a heightened attention, with an interest.
Yeah. As you can imagine, I'm trying to make sense of something which is completely unfamiliar to me, meaning virtual reality. Although, and here there is maybe another point of convergence. Years ago, I realized that for the first time, I did not agree with the greatest 20th century historian, meaning Marc Bloch, on a crucial point. Bloch said in his posthumously published methodological reflections, Apologie pour l'histoire ou métier d'historien, he said, experiments are not available to historians or social scientists. It would be impossible and immoral to start a religious movement. So there are experiments for, let's say, hard scientists, but scholars working in the so-called human sciences cannot rely upon experiments. Now, years ago, in an essay which just came out in Italian, it was published in English, Microstorie e Storia del Mondo is the Italian title, I realized that, in fact, at the very center of the historian's work, there is a kind of experiment which is shared by both scientists and social scientists, let's say, hard scientists and historians, sociologists, anthropologists. Mental experiment. Mental experiments. Now, what is the core of the mental experiments? As if. As if. In other words, during our work as historians, we stop and then we construct an hypothesis, and then there is a kind of as-if world which is constructed and possibly refuted because it's incompatible with the evidence. But so this as-if experiment is maybe comparable to virtual reality because it's not reality, it's virtual. So there is a convergence, but the divergence, again, the difference, is related to the presence of the I, the historian who says, okay, let's try this. I'm here, and I'm constructing a kind of as-if world. But this is completely different from the immersion, which I experienced this morning, which I'm still trying to, let's say, digest and understand, because it was so unexpected and overwhelming.
The point of view, as they call it in film and in virtual reality, the POV, is also a given something that an artist with engineers give to either the visitor or to the environment. So there's a choice. And it turns out that it's actually very difficult to extract yourself from yourself. And so just like it is very difficult to speak about language without language, you cannot extract thinking from language, which is why linguists so frequently disagree between each other, including with themselves. Sometimes they think one thing in the morning and another thing in the evening, mutually exclusive. But the point of view, when you are in the piece, you are the visitor. And I affirm that you're the visitor. You are not being observed, you are the one observing. And things that come to you, that happen around you, they happen gently. They happen with time, which is why I needed 30 minutes instead of the sort of regular 7-10 minutes of virtual reality. And I wanted this to wash over you and happen to you. And the POV is a POV of the visitor, which is to confirm their estrangement. So, and yet the distance between the worlds of others and you is fluid, and even the floor in the forest, I wanted to make sure that that floor flows. So the floor is not just grass in the forest. The floor is moving, which, you know, it is a stylized forest. It's not a real forest. And some of the trees are uprooted and they're completely floating. And some of them actually, if you look around, some of them float way into the sky. Some of them are just above. Others are beginning to be uprooted, and others are still rooted, but only just so. And all of a sudden, as a visitor, you buy this. You believe, you actually are given this reality, and somehow you make this leap of faith. I don't know why, but we do.
Well, the visitor is trying to make sense of this, and I think that we are dealing with a powerful technology, which is not only powerful, but even potentially dangerous.
I agree.
Now, this
totally agree.
is not an argument against it, because if, let's say, a technology, a tool, is innocuous, is irrelevant. Okay, but it's dangerous. So I think that, let's say, having stressed the political relevance of your project, we have also a task which implies a reflection on the dangers related to this technology, which could become, let's say, pervasive. And this will be a tragedy, because someone would use this virtual reality technology in order to control society to an extent which is today unthinkable.
Yeah.
So this is not an argument against your experiment. On the contrary, your experiment is powerful, but we have also to imagine, this will be a kind of as-if experiment, a world in which virtual reality would be pervasive as a political tool.
In fact, my team that worked with me on Last Whispers, they are dissidents of things like Call of Duty, which is a military game where visitors kill others. And there's an enormous amount of money in it, and it is backed and financially backed by Pentagon, by militaries in the world, but particularly the one that's made in the United States. So you have millions of people who play from the moment of being a child, of killing, and it's not in the future. This has been the beginning of the application of technology.
Yeah.
And so my engineer, who was making an enormous amount of money, left, and he said, his name is Jonathan Yomayuza, a brilliant, brilliant engineer, and he said, I cannot handle this. I feel I'm going crazy. And he now works on this kind of financially strapped projects like Last Whispers that work on, tiny grants. And because he feels that there is something beautiful that can be done with this tool. And but the application that is, in my view, profoundly malevolent has been going on for a long time, since the emergence of VR. I mean, long time for VR, which is the beginning, 10 years ago or something like that. So, but there is a pushback against it. The other part of my team, my producers, also left this kind of malevolent and violent gaming experiences, and they were my producers, young kids, 25 or something. And parallel to Last Whispers, they also worked on a game that's called, Something Garden. And it's an amazing thing. You come into a garden and nothing happens to you. You don't get killed and nobody kills you. And they went on the market, and in the first day they made $2 million. It turns out people want beauty. They really want it. And what I find with the visitors who come to see the work is this kind of a sense of awe, and also a sense of being unexpected, an experience of something unexpected, including the children. The kids love it. And they come out of it, and that's not what they, have seen before.
Yeah. So
we need to pay attention.
So we agree on this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think it was important to stress the dangers which are related to this kind of experiment. But again, this is not an argument against them. But we have to be aware. And I think a reflection on the implications of virtual reality is something which is really needed.
Okay. Could you share with us your choice of black and white?
Probably part of it is because I come from photography and my preferred medium is black and white photography, analog. And the reason I prefer black and white is because it leaves you room for imagination. It leaves you room for imagination because color fills in everything. There's, there's all is basically delivered to you. All information is delivered. Black and white has a sort of a mystery, and it's not a nostalgic choice. It's a choice that leaves you room to, again, imagine. And I keep wanting to leave people room for imagination.
First of all, thank you so much for the amazing talk, of course. And just a small word regarding something which has not been too much touched, which is the second part of the topic, which is related to vanishing worlds. So probably more from a historical perspective, you said that right now there's a much faster speed at which languages are vanishing, right? So does it mean also words and culture related to it are vanishing faster?
Well, I mean, certainly globalization implies, not only, for instance, the spread of English as a sort of lingua franca, but also, consumerism as, something which is widespread by parts of the world. But on the other hand, there is a sort of a tragic split between developing countries and underdeveloped countries. So I mean, the reactions to globalization as a world in which the tensions and the differences between different parts of the world, well, will pave the way to something unexpected. So, I mean, the ridiculous idea of the end of history, died immediately. That was grotesque.
Thank God for that.
Huh?
Thank God for that.
No, for sure. But I mean, it was ridiculous.
A preposterous idea.
So, I mean, yeah, but also there was a kind of ridiculous optimistic idea. And the result is also tragic, as we know. And it's difficult to make predictions. Certainly, the degree of destruction, which is related to globalization, it's something which is, it was unexpected in terms of speed and amount of destruction. But it's also difficult to say how, let's say, different cultures and different societies will react to this.
You know, I have to add, I met someone from Cheyenne tribe in Oklahoma in the United States. And this man, a very intelligent, cosmopolitan man who speaks many languages, including Cheyenne, he told me of his father, who, if he ever was caught speaking Cheyenne, he would have his head bashed into a wall. Now, we're talking about 1960s. That's not very long ago. That's just like yesterday.
Yeah.
However, there was an interesting aspect about it. His father knew the enemy because that enemy was bashing his head into the wall. When the Roman Empire went and erased God knows how many languages and dialects, those that were being erased knew the enemy. They saw them. Now, globalization, anonymity has replaced the way that power functions. So something that used to be divine, entitled, exceptional, that claimed authority and was very clear, and actually there was no mental trip on you, the person whose head was getting bashed. Now, you simply have no room. So when I showed this work in various places, and I particularly make a point of showing it with people, for people who actually are having this experience. And there was an interesting, the comments were fascinating. A poet, one in Mexico City of the an Ixtec poet in Mexico, told me, first of all, one thing. He said, I don't feel so alone now. I didn't realize that this was the way of so many languages. And I said, actually, this is the way of most languages. And there was a sense of less of a solitude. Another thing was, we discussed it, and he said, it's not that anyone forbids me, it's that I can't really make it. So, of course, the next question is, what is the solution, right? And the only way that you can imagine is bilingualism. And when I think about that, bilingualism, it actually answers to me, a sort of a theory, a little pet theory of mine that I have, is that in us we have two vectors, an inward vector and an outward vector, one that exists in the world and propels itself in the world. And so for that you would need a language that allows you to make it in the world, to see the world, to understand others, some kind of a dominant language, but also rooted in your own world. And people like that Ixtec poet, or another woman from Oaxaca, or that friend of mine from Cheyenne tribe, that are rooted in both their own history and their own world and language, as well as English or Spanish. They seem to be well. They seem to be doing very well in the world indeed. And so, if I think about it, we have a vector in us that is an inward vector. And it has, you can tend to your own garden, know your own roots, know who you are. It also has a downside where, that tends towards nationalism, or in its worst application, fascism. An outer vector that is an exploratory vector that goes out into the world and learns the world and explores, also has an underbelly, which is exploitation, conquest, which normally, like the other vector, claims lives and gives us horror. So the question is, how do we maintain in us the best of these worlds? And I feel that we need to not do the binary choices, which is not really a choice, it's an ultimatum. But what you do is you sort of pick the best, the most, that gives us best in the world, that brings out in us the best, a possibility. And I remember the end of The Cheese and the Worms, where the very end is not even about Pinocchio. The very end is there are other millers.
Yeah, exactly.
There are other millers that were around like that. And it's, again, an opening, a possibility.
Well, I mentioned a trial. We have only, let's say, a short remark about Marco Marcato, who believed that when the body dies, the soul also dies. And so I said, we know a lot of things about Pinocchio, about Marco and Marcato, and men and women who lived and died without leaving any trace. We don't know anything about them. So, I mean, that's the reason why I was saying that historians are used to deal with traces which are related to an enormous continent which is completely unknown and lost forever. Now, obviously, let's say, disappearance of languages is something which takes place at an enormous speed, which is unknown as far as the past is concerned. But the disappearance of human traces is not a novelty.
No.